It was a damp spring morning in Frankfurt, 1850. The city's old stone streets still echoed with the hum of hammers and saws post-war reconstruction in slow motion. Most people moved with the weary rhythm of routine, bakers setting out bread, merchants barking orders, children darting under horse carts. But just after dawn, as mist curled low between shop fronts, something fractured the city's sleepy predictability. A man no one saw exactly from where appeared at the heart of a busy intersection, as if he had stepped straight out of the fog itself. He looked wrong, not just foreign wrong in time. His coat was finely tailored but decades out of fashion. Brass buttons, high collar, and a dark wool cut that would have suited the early 1800s more than the bustling streets of post-war Germany. His trousers were tucked neatly into polished boots, worn thin at the soles. He stood motionless for a heartbeat, blinking at the people around him as though they were ghosts. A milk cart nearly struck him before he stumbled back, muttering under his breath in a dialect that turned heads. It sounded like German sort of, but peppered with clipped syllables and strange old phrases that locals couldn't place. Curious and cautious, a pair of shopkeepers approached. One asked the man his name. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest and said it clearly, Joseph Vorin. His eyes darted around the street signs, the horse-drawn trams, the flickering lamps. It was clear he recognized none of it. When asked where he was from, his answer made no more sense than his arrival. Laxaria, on the continent of Sacria, far across the seas. It might have been a joke if not for the look in his eyes, wide, haunted, as though he'd just woken up on the moon. A small crowd formed. Mothers tugged children closer. A passing policeman, sensing trouble, stepped in and guided Vorin away from the curious stares, down the street toward the nearest police station. Inside, warm light revealed more oddities. Vorin's pockets held thin sheaves of paper covered in looping, unfamiliar script. Some pages looked like letters, others like travel permits, but none were written in any language the station's clerks could read. He also carried a leather pouch rattling with coins round, stamped, and heavy, yet none matched any currency circulating through Europe's bustling markets. Detective Roth, a seasoned officer who'd seen drunks, deserters, and ex-soldiers spin all manner of tall tales, sat Vorin down and tried to piece together the story. Where had he come from? What ship had he arrived on? Did he know anyone in Frankfurt? Vorin answered every question the same way, polite, patient, bewildered. He spoke slow, careful German, but kept tripping into phrases no one understood. He insisted he had survived a shipwreck at sea, had lost his companions, and had wandered inland searching for his long-lost brother who had left their homeland many years before. When Roth rolled out maps Germany, Europe, the globe, Vorin studied them intently, finger hovering over countries he clearly recognized by name but never by outline. No Sacria, no Laxaria. He only frowned and said softly, "It is not here. It should be here." Word spread quickly. By noon, a few local scholars and a parish priest had been summoned. They questioned Vorin again. His story never wavered. He claimed to follow a branch of Christianity called Aspasian, a denomination no cleric had ever heard of. He claimed his city lay far beyond the known oceans, on a landmass unknown to all European powers. They asked him to write. He did his hand steady, pen scratching out looping glyphs that looked nothing like Latin, Greek, or any local dialect. The priest shook his head. The scholars whispered about lost colonies, hoaxes, madness. Through it all, Vorin sat calm but restless. Sometimes he closed his eyes and breathed as though steadying himself in a place that did not fit the shape of his mind. By sunset, the police had run out of ideas. They locked him in a plain holding room while they decided what to do next. Notify the ministry, hand him over to the church, return him to the streets, and let the people whisper. But even as the sun dipped behind Frankfurt's rooftops and the lanterns flickered awake, more than a few who had glimpsed Joseph Vorin on that fog-bound morning felt a chill they could not explain. It was as if he had brought the fog with him, some misty secret drifting across a border no map could name. Locked away in a dim cell inside Frankfurt's main police station, Joseph Vorin became a riddle the city could neither solve nor ignore. By sunrise on his second day in custody, word of the man from nowhere had seeped into every cafe, market stall, and tavern within walking distance of the old stone walls. Inside, a steady parade of men in long coats and worried brows gathered around his barred door, local historians, linguists, priests, even a professor who arrived breathless on horseback, demanding the right to speak to the stranger before the church decided he was a madman or, worse, a heretic. Each new question dug the hole deeper. Vorin never changed his answers. He said he came from Laxaria, a nation nestled on a continent he called Sacria, which lay far across a sea he claimed was wider than any ocean the Germans could name. He described his homeland with heartbreaking certainty, a river lined with red oaks, temples made of stone so pale they glowed at dusk, and a royal city crowned by silver domes. When the professors spread out world maps before him, old parchment charts, new printed atlases, he studied them with the grave focus of a lost child. Again and again, his fingertip paused over blank water, between Europe and the Americas, then drifted to the margins where parchment turned white. "It is here," he said softly, tapping the void. "It has always been here." The scholars exchanged glances behind his back. A few scribbled frantic notes, trying to catch every name he mentioned. Relevan, a river. Talmer, a seaport. Zadiria, his capital. Not a single word matched any known place. If he were lying, they thought, he was either the best actor alive or truly believed every word tumbling from his mouth. Equally baffling were the coins and documents retrieved from his coat pockets. Each coin was heavy, warm to the touch, and stamped with an emblem, a rearing stag pierced by a cross surrounded by letters that matched nothing in Latin, Greek, or Gothic. The papers were stranger still, thin sheets the texture of cured hide, covered in a spidery script that flowed in delicate spirals. Local experts found no cipher, no break in the pattern, just words they could not read. A young clergyman, Father Koenig, spent hours at Vorin's side, hoping prayer might pierce the fog. When asked what church he belonged to, Vorin answered without hesitation, Vespasian. He spoke of it like a branch of Christianity, yet every ritual, every hymn, every gospel passage he quoted sounded half familiar, half wrong, like reading verses through a cracked mirror. Father Koenig pressed him gently. "Do you know of the Pope?" "The Holy Roman Church." Vorin frowned, shook his head. "I know of the Redeemer, the Book of the Risen, and the Way of Vespasian. But your words are not ours." More scholars gathered, arguing outside the cell in hushed German. One muttered that Vorin must be an idiot or a hoaxer, some peasant who'd learned just enough foreign words to invent a tale and beg for charity. But when asked to prove himself, Vorin only asked for a pencil. He wrote page after page in that swirling language until his fingers cramped, each line as fluent and graceful as the last. On the third day, the police chief himself came to see the enigma. He demanded to know who paid Vorin to stir up the city's fear and wonder. But when the chief leaned close, he found himself staring into eyes that held no mockery, only an exhaustion too deep for pretense. The guards noticed something else. Vorin refused to sleep for more than an hour at a time. Twice, a sentry caught him standing perfectly still at the barred window, murmuring in a voice like the tide on distant rocks. When asked what he was saying, Vorin only whispered, "Ra 11 zadi talmer home." Outside, the street beneath his window thickened every day with onlookers, merchants, beggars, curious mothers lifting children to glimpse the man behind the mystery. By the end of that week, there were as many theories as there were townsfolk. Some claimed he was an angel cast out for blasphemy. Others said he was a foreign prince hiding from assassins. A few insisted he had stepped through a tear in the world itself, lost between centuries. Inside his cell, Joseph Vorin offered no comfort, no escape, and no apology. He merely pressed a hand to the cold stone wall, as if it might remember a road that led him back to the world he had left behind. By the fourth day, the cramped police station had turned into something between a circus and a chapel. Curious townspeople gathered outside the iron gate, whispering rumors. Some insisted Joseph Vorin was a prophet, a lunatic, or a spirit conjured by the city's restless past. Others swore he was a spy, a fraud wrapped in too many clever lies to unravel. Inside, the air grew stale with arguments. Two university professors arrived from Berlin, arguing late into the night with the local pastor about whether Vorin was proof of an undiscovered civilization or a living example of hysteria. The priests muttered about devils and possession when no one else could hear. Through it all, Joseph Vorin remained oddly calm. He answered the same questions in the same patient, bewildered tone. He refused food at times, staring at his bowl as though it contained something he'd never seen before. More than once, a guard caught him standing perfectly still by the tiny barred window, forehead pressed to the glass, mouth moving in silent prayer or foreign syllables. On the evening of the fifth day, the chief constable decided it was time for action. If Vorin was a lost sailor, he'd be turned over to the consulate. If he was insane, he'd be sent to the local asylum. Either way, Frankfurt's police were tired of guarding a man who spoke riddles while the city gossiped itself sick. They posted officers at his door, locked him inside, and left him with fresh water and blankets. One guard later swore he heard Vorin humming a tune, a soft, melodic chant that seemed to rise and fall like distant church bells. Before dawn broke, the station's night shift found only an empty cell. The heavy bolt was still thrown, the small window remained sealed from the outside. There was no sign of struggle, no footprints, no loose bars, no broken lock. It was as if Joseph Vorin had simply stepped backward into the same mist that had once carried him to Frankfurt. Panic followed swiftly. The city buzzed with every version of his vanishing that rumor could invent. Some said he had turned to smoke and slipped under the door. Others believed he had bribed a guard, though none could explain how he'd produce familiar money from coins no one could spend. A few claimed he never existed at all, that the whole thing was a prank born from drunken soldiers and overexcited clerks. Yet the records were there, the signed statements, the coins, the scribbled notes in an unknown hand. Scholars kept the papers under lock and key, turning them over year after year in dusty archives, hoping to match the looping symbols to some lost dialect. They never did. As decades passed, Joseph Vorin's story grew a second life. Occultists said he was a time traveler thrown from the 1800s into a century ahead of his own, doomed to vanish back through a tear in reality. Philosophers used him as an example in lectures about human belief and the edges of reason. Writers invented new places like Syria and Sakria, populating them with grand cities and starless oceans in cheap pulp magazines. Whenever someone claimed the story was a hoax, they stumbled on one problem. If Vorin was a con artist, where did he go? How did he slip past guards in a locked room? Why did no one ever catch him living under a new name or trying the same trick again? Some modern skeptics explain him away, a deluded man, a castaway from an isolated village, perhaps, who mixed folklore and fevered dreams into a tale that outlived his own troubled mind. Others lean darker. Maybe he really did cross some hidden border, a thin place between worlds. If so, what does that say about the boundaries we trust to keep the known and unknown apart? A century and a half later, the only certainty is the same as it was in that foggy intersection. Joseph Vorin came from nowhere, said what he said, and returned to nowhere just as suddenly. He left behind no footprints, only questions. In Frankfurt, if you ask the oldest families, they'll tell you that some mornings, when mist gathers heavy between the old stone alleys, you might see a man in an outdated coat, eyes wide, lips moving in a dialect no living tongue can claim. And then he is gone. Stories like his remind us that for every map we draw, there is always an edge we cannot name. For every locked door, there is always a key we do not hold. And for every Joseph Vorin there is the question we can never quite close.